Welcome to the Hardin County Carcass Show of Champions. The show is sponsored by Jenkins Meats, the Hardin County Agricultural Society, Hardin County Pork Producers, Cattle Producers, and Sheep Improvement Association, as well as OSU Extension. This year's Carcass Show of Champions includes the Market Steer Champion exhibited by Lane Underwood, Reserve Champion Steer exhibited by Tanner Butcher, Champion Lamb Riley Heights, Reserve Champion Lamb Sydney Gossard, Champion Market Burro Taylor Payne, Reserve Champion Barrow Ivy Gonzalez, Champion Market Gilt exhibited by Ella Sherman, and the Reserve Champion Gilt exhibited by Taylor Payne. Our judge for today's show is Dr. Lyda Garcia, Ohio State University Extension Meat Specialist and Associate Professor of Meat Science.
Hey guys, Lyda Garcia here, Extension Meat Specialist at The Ohio State University and Associate Professor. I'm here today to evaluate pork carcasses. One of the first things that we have to ask ourselves once we expose that loin is, how good is that quality? Is that quality acceptable or unacceptable? And what exactly determines acceptable or unacceptable? Well, there is a defect known as pale soft and exudative that can be commonly found in pork and in poultry. It's caused by short-term stress. And so usually what happens is when that animal stresses minutes before slaughter, there is a level of glycogen sugar that we use as an energy source. That glycogen is going to get broken down into a pyruvic acid and eventually a lactic acid. If too much lactic acid is produced, meaning too much glycogen is being burned too fast, then that muscle pH is going to be sacrificed. That means that compared to normal of 5.6 to 5.8, it's going to drop closer to a 5.3, possibly a 5.4. So what happens is it then denatures all the proteins that are responsible for holding on to that structure of that muscle, that water, binding to that water, and meanwhile, the water is going to leach out. So that's one of the main things that we have to look for first is quality. Now, as you can see, this one is really good, acceptable quality. We don't have to worry about that quality defect. So when we expose this loin between the 10th and 11th rib, what we'll do is come in and measure the back fat. As you can see here, this is my main area of interest, my loin. We will go 3/4 up that loin. Now, these carcasses, this particular carcass is skinned. So the equation that we use, once again from USDA, accounts for skin. So considering that this carcass does not have a skin, I will add 1/10 to that back fat to assure that we are meeting that formula of the calculation standards. So we'll take that measurement right along that 3/4 mark, and then I will take this nice grid, once again, remember every 20 dots equals 1 square inch, and then I'll place it nicely on this loin, and then I will count every dot outside of the squares, and then divide by 20, and that's what gives me my loin in square inches. And so there you have it. The pork carcass that combines trimness and muscling to the highest degree, that's going to result in the greatest percent sellable product, is the one who's going to win today. Hey guys, Lyda Garcia here once again. Came back to Hardin County to judge your beef carcasses for 2021. So let's get to it. What are we exactly looking for when we are evaluating beef carcasses? We'll know that there are two main factors involved: quality grade and yield grade. Let's start with quality grade. So as you can see, we have one beef carcass in front. What we have to do is expose that ribeye in order to evaluate for quality and yield grade. We'll rib between the 12th and 13th rib. Let it sit in the oxygen for about 15-20 minutes. That really helps that real fine marbling surface, which works in your favor. So the one thing that I'll do is I'll look at the little white flecks of fat in this main muscle, all known as the ribeye, or if you want to be more scientific, it's the longissimus dorsi. So what I'll do is I'll evaluate that ribeye for what it is, and then we'll use these really fancy marbling cards that that was provided by USDA. Now, we use this a lot for teaching purposes, for our classrooms, for meat judging training teams, and even our USDA will use this to train future graders, right? So what we'll do is I will evaluate that ribeye, then I will find the marbling cards that best match. So in this case, what I have here is an average choice and a high choice. And based on what I think, whether it falls closer to this card, which is the average choice, or falls closer to the higher card, which is the high choice, then I'll make my marbling call. This is what we refer to as marbling score. In addition to marbling, we will also evaluate for age. That means age of animal at time of harvest. Now, I don't have any birth records when I arrived, so there is a way to evaluate for age, and it's called ossification. The first three buttons that we see here, which is the thoracic portion, which is the rib portion of this carcass, is what I'm going to look at. What you see here at the very tip is cartilage. The younger the animal, the more cartilage you'll find. As the animal gets older, this cartilage will be replaced with bone. That's what we call ossification. But as you can see, my three buttons right there are as white as white can be. That's indicative that this is a very young animal. So, taking into account marbling score and age of animal at time of harvest is how we actually calculate the quality grade. So when it comes to yield grading, which means again, cuttability, percent sellable product, we want to know that of an 800-pound beef carcass, how much of that is coming from fat and muscle. So when we evaluate for fat, as you can see here is our ribeye, we will measure 3/4 up that ribeye. So if this is my main muscle, my main area of interest here, I'll cut it in half and then cut the top part in half, and that will be my 3/4 mark. And we will record these measurements, these units, in inches. In addition to fat, we'll also account for percent internal fat, known as kidney, pelvic, and heart fat. So where do we find that? Well, it's right exactly where it says. This right here is what we consider our kidney knob. This is our pelvic area. And then right along right here, this area is where the heart sits. So for the trained eye, we will estimate how much of that carcass weight is coming from internal fat, which is again, kidney, pelvic, and heart fat. When we start looking at muscling, we will use this nice fancy ribeye dot grid, as you can see. Every 10 dots is 1 square inch. So there are 20 dots in this triangle, which equates to 2 square inches. There are 80 dots in this square, semi-rectangle, so that's an 8 square inch, and then there are 10 dots at the bottom, which is a 1 square inch. Considering that I already know what that is, I will place this ribeye as is, or I'm sorry, the grid as is, on the ribeye, and then I will count everything that the dot is touching. Once again, we have to be aware of where that main muscle is, and be very careful not to include any of the extra muscles. And then, of course, we take into account hot carcass weight. Now, once again, we will use a USDA formula to calculate percent sellable product, to calculate the yield grade, and then the carcass that best combines quality and yield grade to the highest degree is the one who's going to win today. Hey guys, Lila Garcia here, Extension Meat Specialist at The Ohio State University. Today I have the privilege of judging lamb carcasses for Hardin County. So one of the big things that we look for when it comes to carcasses, especially lamb carcasses, is basically cuttability. What does that mean? We want to know of that hot carcass weight, let's say it weighs 85 pounds or 90 pounds, how much of that weight is coming from muscle and how much is coming from fat. So one of the first things that we'll do is expose the main ribeye, the main muscle here known as that ribeye, the longissimus dorsi. And where we rib is between the 12th and 13th rib. Now, one of the first things that we'll measure is back fat. Now, we always cut that ribeye in half and measure using this nice fancy ruler. You can see 2/10 right here. I will evaluate both sides, and take an average or just take exactly what it is. In addition to just back fat, we will measure body wall. Body wall is 5 inches from the center portion of that backbone, the vertebral column. And so I will place the ruler right at that mid-center and then measure 5 inches out. And so when it's time to measure, we will include the rib and run all the way to the exterior portion or that outer edge of that fat. In addition to fat, we're going to look at muscle. So in evaluating these two ribeyes, I will find the larger of the two. And when I start to measure, I'll use this nice fancy grid known as a Loinai dot grid. And that's to say that every 20 dots is 1 square inch. So, for example, as you can see here, and I'll place it up against the carcass, you'll see that there are 3 rectangular boxes. In the inner rectangular box, we have 40 dots found in this particular rectangle. And if it's every 20 dots is equals to 1 square inch, we now have a 2 square inch size. We then have 60 dots in that middle portion, which then divided by 20 is 3 square inches. And then we have 80 on that outer, that larger rectangle. Divided by 20 is now 4 square inches. So considering that I already know what is measured, I'm going to place this grid right in that ribeye. We have to make sure that we don't account for these other muscles on the outside. So what we'll do is I'll just place it here. I already know I know that inner portion is a 2 square inch, and then I will count every dot on outside of that rectangle. And so then I'll use a USDA formula to plug in all my numbers, and then that'll tell me percent boneless trim retail cuts. In other words, how much sellable product we have. And then we'll also calculate a USDA yield grade. So the one that has the highest yield grade, in this case, is going to be a yield grade 1. The lowest yield grade that we have is a yield grade 5. All that's saying is that a yield grade 1 has more muscle, which means more sellable product and less fat. So the one that best combines the highest yield grade along with the greatest percent sellable product is your winner.
We hope you've enjoyed this Hardin County Carcass Show of Champions. Thank you again to our sponsors, Jenkins Meats, Hardin County Agricultural Society, Hardin County Pork Producers, Cattle Producers, and Hardin County Sheep Improvement Association, and Ohio State University Extension.